Good morning, bonjour. My name is Adrian Wotton. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Film Commission. I'm your moderator for this session today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel to talk about cross-collaboration, particularly on visual effects and post-production between the UK and France. But before I do, we're going to see a couple of showreels, one from the British Film Commission and one from Film France, and then we'll get into the meat of the panel. So please, let's play the showreels. Thank you.
How many countries are in this country? 4.
Something's coming.
Oh, that's just giving me goosebumps.
Finally your time now, isn't it?
What lives do we want to live? What legacy do we hope to leave?
You can be more than you ever dreamed you could be.
It's happening. Oh my God.
It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
We will make it back here one day, won't we?
Assassination.
It's amazing, isn't it? That life is what we make of it.
I love it.
Ooh, delicious.
My people need to be respected.
Shall we?
The things they can do.
I love it.
What do you want?
All we are doing is realizing our dream.
Understood.
Sorry, just let me deal with this.
Okay, ladies, let's do this.
Shall I dance around a bit as we do it, so it's more pleasing for you?
What's happening now?
I don't know.
Your world is shaped by dreams that I create.
So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that. Reverse it.
I've come to believe it's not so much what you believe. It's how hard you believe it.
You sure about this?
Not ready. Well then, let's make it worthwhile.
Thank you, fellas. That was perfect.
Be yourself. Be bold.
That's more rocket!
Well, you always wanted to go to Paris.
Oh boy.
Well, after that modest little compilation of clips, we'll crack on and talk about well, some of that and some things that perhaps aren't in those two show reels. This is a kind of sequel of our sort of entente cordiale. We did a panel last year about the relationship between UK and France, and this is a continuation of that, focusing specifically on the work that has gone on across our the channel, the films and television series that have been made in our respective countries, and collaboration between our industries, which we're very excited about and which is blossoming and getting bigger. And to talk about that in more detail, we have the panel. Their names are up here, but I should say something about each one of them individually. To my far my far right is Neil Hatton, MBE, Chief Executive of UK Screen Alliance, representing all the visual effects and post industries of the UK. And I'm going to be talking to Neil about the changes that have been made in terms of our tax reliefs and the current context and situation. Next to him is Michael Illingworth, the founder and creative director of VFX, who done, there's a lot of credits, Michael, but The Amateur, which we're going to talk about, Get Millie Black, the Rig 2, Paris Has Fallen, lots of collaboration across the Atlantic, the Channel, and we're going to come back to you. And then actually from the other side, from France, Laurence Ehrman, and Laurence is the founder and senior VFX supervisor, it says there, of The Yard. And Laurence is very interesting because, again, worked on a variety of exciting projects, including Rings of Power, but also has not just got offices and locations in Paris and France and Montpellier, but also now in London. So again, a very clear example of that cross-channel collaboration. And also, right, my just slightly right is Daphne Laurier, my great friend and colleague, who's the head of Film France-CNC, to talk about, again, her work, the kind of work that we share, promoting our respective territories, but also talking about what's happened in France as a result of the changes and the improvements you've made to your tax reliefs. So without any further ado, I'm going to kick off and probably for the benefit of the audience, I think it would be really helpful to talk a little bit, not to get into terribly granular detail, but about what's happened with the respective incentives and what the incentives mean. I'm going to start with Neil because, as is brand new, it's only really just kicking in, the new VFX relief. So just tell us a little bit about what that means, what it's going to do.
Bonjour, messieurs, dames. Thank you, Adrian. You know, we've been campaigning for changes to the UK's tax credit for visual effects for quite some time, and as Adrian said, it's now implemented, and you can claim it on expenditure from January the 1st this year. So what it's done is we've increased the rate. It's now 29.25% net for visual effects work in the UK. But also, crucially, we've given it an exemption from the 80% cap. And that, I think, makes the biggest difference. Because very often, depending on where people were shooting, it was very common for people to either shoot in the UK and then do their VFX elsewhere, or do their VFX in the UK if they'd shot elsewhere. But it was rare that they would do both. So that allows that to happen now because of this cap exemption. So we think that's going to really give us a boost to our companies. There were many reasons why you would want to use the UK in any case, because of our superb infrastructure. We've got lots of capacity. We represent around 45 of, I estimate, around 60 VFX companies in the UK. It's good to see some of them in the audience today. I can see Union VFX over there, woo. and a call out also to Milk over there. Yeah, Sarah Bennett, Oscar award-winning VFX supervisor. Good to see you there. We've got, the depth of talent, and we've got the track record of excellence. I think there's some stat that says 11 out of 14 years a UK founded or UK headquartered or a UK VFX supervisor has been connected with the Oscar winner for VFX. So it's an immense track record, and I think now we've got a very clear path for people to come and spend their money with us. But we also recognise that there are incentives all over the world, and what we've started to see is things like the Yard coming to the UK, and vice versa. I think Milk, you have a base in Bordeaux, yeah. So so it happens in both directions. So I think what's important is that these companies are situated where their clients want them to be in order to maximise the use of the incentives, and we're seeing more of that.
Thanks, Neil. We're going to come back to you, but I'd like to, now invite Daphne to say something about the French incentives and and generally the French VFX infrastructure and industry.
Yeah, so I have no new announcement as you have, guys, but it's still pretty good to remind that the French tax rebate is 30% basis when you come to shoot or do your VFX. But what was implemented in 2020 was the VFX bonus. So if you actually spend over 2 million on VFX expenditure in France, you get a 40% tax rebate, and that applies on all eligible expenditures, including shooting expenditure. So this is where it becomes very interesting. And then for the rest, as you guys, we have some criteria. We have minimum days of shooting if you come to shoot, minimum spending, which is pretty low, 250K or half of your budget. It's up to 80% of the eligible expenses all the way for us. And then you have a cultural test that we all do have.
Yes.
But what I wanted to mention is, for us, the cultural test is different if you come only to shoot or if you come to do only VFX. And for the VFX, where it gets interesting, is like it's pretty open. So when you think of sci-fi or fantasy, where you have undetermined character, location, like space, alien, monster, that will get you points as a cultural test. And so it's easy to come to France for VFX only. And actually, Lawrence has a lot of examples around that. You mentioned Rings of Power, which has nothing to do with France in the scenario, but qualify for the tax rebate. So that's it for the rebate.
And in terms of, as you said, you've got a mature tax credit in terms of visual effects in that sense, having run for several years now. And I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm going to come back to Neil in terms of what he thinks the impact of this will be. But what have you seen? What has France seen as a result of that introduction in 2020? Has it really stimulated the business? Has it developed the infrastructure? I mean, talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
because it has 5 years now, so I can have my crystal ball for you and see where you're headed. So we've seen a major acceleration of the VFX in France since the introduction of the bonus. There are more than 100 projects that's done VFX since 2020, right. And the amount of spending is almost 140 million euros on VFX spend. And when you compare the number of spending between 2020 and 2025 compared to 29 to 2020, 29 is the date of the tax rebate, you know, simple 30%. It multiplied 4.5%, the expenses on VFX done in France. So that was a major impact for us. We've seen also a lot of more companies, VFX companies, working on international production. You know, back 10 years ago, there was maybe one company, BFC, which is really known. And now we have more than 20 VFX companies working on international productions. We have more on the domestic side, but really 20 on international. We've seen also, as you mentioned, international VFX studios looking at France and setting up in France. One of us, which is also a UK company, was the first, then Milk, Rodeo FX from Canada. So they came because of the rebate and because of the talents there. And so they brought back, and the French studio, like The Yard, brought back also big IPs from the US, like Rings of Power, but we got other Guardian of the Galaxy, Beetlejuice. And what is interesting also is we have great talent trained in France. The schools are really renowned, but then they had a tendency to go to other countries like US or Canada. And since COVID, we had the introduction of the bonus, and then people also wanted to come home after the COVID. And so the French ecosystem was able to offer this interesting, ambitious project. And so they came back in, and we are really lucky to welcome them back home with their international experience. And actually, Lawrence, I think you can touch base on this, because you're actually hiring these talents.
And I'll come back to you, and actually you talk about that in more detail. Before I bring Michael and Lawrence in, just going back to Neil for a second, and it is a bit crystal ball gazing. You said yourself, Neil, that there's been a campaign for a long time working, you know, lobbying government to get this introduction of the VFX tax credit. You've heard what Daphne's just said about what the impact's been in France over the last 5 years. What are you sensing in terms of now it has finally been introduced? Obviously, people are only just now beginning to actually access it, so we haven't got any empirical data yet. But in terms of anecdotal or, you know, market response, what are you feeling about it?
Well, certainly my members are in the VFX community are starting to see those green shoots. They're starting to see more inquiries. And more people booking in series and large features. It's difficult, as you say, it's difficult to say. But when we put the case to our government on what we wanted from this, well, obviously we have to do some of those predictions. And our predictions were based on the best data we had at the time, which was the 2019 data from the BFI's Screen Business Report. So at that point, tax relief supported visual effects in the UK was £370 million a year. We think, well, we're predicting about a 45% increase on that. But obviously, it's very difficult to predict because we've seen a huge roller coaster in what's happened. You know, we've had COVID, we've had the strikes, we had the boom. So it's very difficult to predict exactly. But I think we've also got another effect that we didn't predict, which is the limited budget film tax credit, which is also coming. Yeah, we call it's not officially called the IFTC, but
we all call it. No.
Yeah. And it's not specifically for independent film, although it was aimed at that. So what that means is visual effects and post-production are both eligible expenses within that tax credit. And that comes in at 39.75% net. So it's a very attractive incentive. And although the 80% cap still exists in that, but what it does mean, if you are shooting outside of the UK, you can use it. If your budget is lower than £15 million, you're eligible for that tax credit. There are some bits and pieces that you have to do in addition to our normal cultural test.
So, a British director or British screenwriter, yes.
Or be a co-production.
Yeah, or be an official co-production treaty, yeah.
And I hear that there's more interest in co-production in the last 6 months than there's been in the previous several years.
Well, I think this is also germane to that. This isn't the subject of this panel, but I think that Daphne and I have been talking about this, and I think it's absolutely true that in France and in other European territories, I think the interest in us working together because of the IFTC stimulating independent producers across the channel, across other parts of Europe. I think certainly the British Film Commission is seeing that very much. So I think you're absolutely right.
But you can qualify for the IFTC with a VFX-only project in the UK, and that would mean that you would get a 39.75% incentive, which is very attractive.
Certainly is. So more of that perhaps later. But what I want to do now is bring in our two industry experts, and I'd start by, I mean, I've given you very brief introductions, but Michael, tell us a bit more about your work and about Vine and the work that you have been doing, the work that you are doing, and I'm going to do the same with Lawrence as well. So.
Sure. Well, I started my career in the 90s doing commercials at the Mill, and then moved to Mill Film to do feature films. And the first film I did was Gladiator, which did really well, which was fantastic. Then after a few years, I decided to jeopardize all of my good job that I had and set up my own visual effects company, which, whether that was a good idea or not, but after about 2 years, wasn't going particularly well, but I was invited to Leavesden Studios to work on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by Tim Burke and Emma Norton. So that's when things started to pick up. I had a studio for a brief time in central London, and then for the last 8 years we've been operating in Cambridge. So started very small, and now last year we were up to about a team of 85. So that has retracted a little bit recently because there has been a bit of a slowdown of late. It's sort of not many of the big companies green lighting, but yeah, we're hoping with the new tax incentives that'll pick up.
And we'll come back because you have been involved in projects that have very much crossed the channel and globally, and I'll come back to you. But first, Lawrence, tell us a bit about the Yard, and obviously you are working definitely cross-channel as well as around, and tell us about the history of the Yard and the things that you've been working on.
Thank you. As Michael, I started my career in the late 90s, working more than 15 years in the industry, and then almost 10 years ago I started the Yard. The Yard is a 100% independent company. We are based in Paris, Montpellier since 2 years, and as you mentioned, now in London. We are almost 120 actually, and we're going to be 150 by the end of summer. And yes, since the beginning, the goal for the Yard, and my goal, was to attract big projects in France, because I was sure that even if we had a big company, a well-known company, I was sure that we could be able to attract big projects, and being able to attract this project give us also the ability to keep the talents in France. I think we have the best school in animation in VFX in France, but as Daphne said, all these students were going abroad due to the lack of international project, and they were attracted by big blockbusters. And now we are able to keep them in France, and also to bring back a lot of talents in France. And Montpellier was part of the strategy, because after the COVID, thank you COVID, but after the COVID, a lot of artists do want to come back to France, but they didn't want to be in Paris. They were in south of France and north of France, and being able to offer them like an office to collaborate together and to work together was really part of the strategy. And actually 80% of the team in Montpellier is coming from UK, New Zealand, Montreal. So yeah, definitely a good option. Now being in London is totally different. Definitely it's because of the new tax rebate, tax incentive, to give more option to our clients, and also because there is a lot of experienced artists there. Yeah. We have a lot of junior and mid artists in France, but there is a lot of senior artists in UK. So now we are in this strategy to build and solidify the company with this kind of artist.
And we'll come back to that. We'll also come back to decentralization away from the big cities, but actually moving around other parts of France as you are, and you being based in Cambridge, Michael. But before we do, I think we're going to move on and actually talk to Michael a bit more. And we've got two specific kind of case study examples to delve into a little bit more detail. And we're going to start by talking about The Amateur, which did shoot between the UK and France and has direct involvement. Michael's got direct involvement in it. But before we do talk about The Amateur, which is obviously very recent, let's see the trailer. If we can.
You ever wonder what they do with all the stuff you dig up for them?
That's not my job.
No, but you never wonder?
No, it's the CIA. I gotta trust that they'll make the right call. Maybe it's better not to know. Love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Charlie, I think you need to see this.
What is this?
Your wife has been killed. What you do is very important to what we do. Let us handle this.
I want mission-specific training, cash, and a new identity.
Have you lost your mind?
I want to find and kill the people who murdered my wife.
I don't think you could beat a 90-year-old nun in an arm wrestling match.
I want to face my wife's killers, look them in the eyes, and balance the scales.
Take it. Take it! Aye. Point it at my chest! Do it now! Put your finger on the trigger. You can't do what I do no matter how much I train you. You're just not a killer, Charlie.
You're just a nerdy fella that works on computers. But what you doing? Just gonna kill you. Do you ever account for the things I'm good at? You held a gun to my wife's head. This is a remote that controls a device that's been decompressing the glass beneath you.
You have the wrong person.
No, I have exactly the right person.
We got a ping in Rome.
He's in London.
He just got on a bus in Prague.
He practically invented half of our surveillance. Maybe y'all misjudge this individual. This ends here.
You recognize her? If you jump really fast, you might survive the blast.
Great!
Well, that's quite tantalising. Okay, so obviously shot in the Wharf and Landmark House in the UK. Sound mix was done in the UK. Post between ILM and Vine. We're going to come back to that. Daphne, what was the French involvement in The Amateur?
Yeah, so the French involvement was mostly on location scouting because part of the story is taking place in France. It's actually between UK, France, Turkey, and I think a bit of US that was shot in the UK, actually. Rami Malek's character goes to Paris and Marseille. And what's interesting is that usually production, international production, when they come to Paris, is to film the iconic Paris. But as the director said, there will be no Big Ben, there will be no Eiffel Tower, and there is not. So they didn't go to the places you would expect in Paris. They actually were looking for more urban settings. So they went to a train station, which is not the most glamorous, place, but are more in the feeling of the movie. So they went to train station, and then in Marseille, what's interesting is that actually, Rami Malek was also a producer of the movie. In an interview, he said that he actually could, choose where he wanted to shoot, and he really wanted to shoot in Marseille because he has seen other movies shot there. And this is kind of a grit vibe of the city, and this is what they were looking for. So they have also this diverse location in Marseille. They did also some shooting in Provence Studio, which is in Martigues, near Marseille, and there they recreated the boat cabin on, water jack, I think that's it. So that was done there. And actually, they shot in Turkey, but accidentally a scene that is taking place in Turkey was shot in a beach near Martigues because the set designer loved it and it felt like the right place. And for another story on location, so part of the story is taking place in Russia, but when the shooting happened, it became complicated to go shooting there. So we actually did some research to, Russian wharf and other location, but I think they didn't shoot Russia in France. I think the UK stood for Russia at the end.
I think they did, yeah. I think that's absolutely right.
So, yeah, that was mostly location for us. We did also some support for air filming in Aix-en-Provence. And in that kind of production, we can help on visa, but for a short period of time, American and UK cast and crew actually don't need visa, so you're welcome.
That was helpful, yeah. Thank you. That's very illuminating. Well, let's now move on to the visual effects side of it. This is the panel. Michael, what did you do on the Amateur?
Sure. So I was speaking to Alex Reinach, the visual effects producer, and he was looking to change some of the graphic sequences for various reasons. Story points weren't working as they needed them as they shot them in camera. So we were brought on to work on the graphics sequences. Once Tim Kilgour, our creative lead, joined the team, he sort of came up with some mood boards to try and create a certain look for the graphics, but also he was tasked with providing 2-minute sequences that editorial department could work with. They could put them into the sequences so they work chronologically using their timeline. Tim and his team also had to come up with 2 different styles of graphics. So there was the CIA graphics, which were slightly more corporate, and then Rami Malek's character, who developed some of these bits of software himself, had to look a little bit like they were put together by a hacker or something that was a little bit more, few rough edges as well. So I was speaking to Tim this week, and he was just really pleased that, there was a sort of a rawness to the graphics. They weren't too polished, and they just, they felt lived in. So that then moved on, and a lot of those graphic sequences we took to a macro shoot, where we did lots of close-ups of the monitors, so we actually got the feeling that they were on screen. But then, of course, some of the shots where they'd already filmed the graphics, we had to replace those as well. So that was a case of cutting out the foregrounds, replacing the graphics, and putting those in there. So the other thing to say is that the team had a really good working relationship with ILM.
I was going to ask you about that, what that working relationship was, yeah.
So Jan Morosk, the overall supervisor, we went down to London to see him and sort of talk through the sequences. Tim also spoke to the director as well. But we just had a really good feedback loop there in terms of where we needed to go, what beats we needed to hit in terms of the timeline. So it was a really great collaboration for us.
And that collaboration is, I mean, I'm going to ask Neil about this more generally, but is that very common from your point of view in terms of, you working with a bigger company like ILM that, and is that a regular part of your work practice?
It hopefully will be. That's definitely the hope. We do work alongside other visual effects companies on other shows, but I think because Jan Morosk was the creative and the visual effects supervisor on that, he was very keen to sort of bring a company on that he could trust and sort of work with and steer as well. So I think when on some bigger shows where we tend to collaborate, occasionally our work overlaps with other visual effects companies, but not quite so strong as it did on this particular project.
Okay. And Neil, on that, I mean, for those people who aren't visual effects companies in the room, this practice of working multiple vendors, the bigger the show, that is a very common thing. And is there advantages to that in terms of the kind of infrastructure and also the ability to work across different territories?
Well, I think London is particularly well set up for that. With that, I mean, traditionally everyone was in the 2 square miles of Soho. That's not the case anymore. We've even with Michael, you know, spreading out to Cambridge, but we've also seen the spreading out. In fact, your place is in, was it Farringdon, that kind of area? So they've moved a few miles east, but it's still, you know, it's still walkable. Which is unusual, you know, compared to some other VFX hubs where you've got to get in a car and drive to go. So it's kind of a kind of community. A lot of the artists have worked in different places as well. You know, you walk into one particular VFX house and you'll see somebody that you met before in another VFX house. So there's a lot of that movement goes on. And I think that's what kind of really boosts the talent, because it is a hot house with all of those people there. But yeah, it is very common to collaborate across VFX houses, particularly when you're working on the same show. And you know, from a producer's point of view, it also mitigates risk. That's another reason why they do it, because obviously, you know, schedules might change. You might need more capacity somewhere else, or somebody might be falling behind schedule, so you need to bring more capacity on. So you can have a very flexible array of suppliers by doing that. And then, of course, we also see where the big major VFX houses, the likes of Framestore and DNEG, where they've got multiple bases around the world. Well, and of course, they will also be placing different parts of that work in different parts of the world. So it's hugely flexible.
And if I might,
yeah, please.
That, what we've seen also is in France the emergence of VFX supervisor companies that we didn't have a couple of years ago, and they manage different vendors across France or across different countries, and you manage the risk, but also you can tap into very specificities of each studios, because some of them will be the best for creators or for particles, so that allows that also. And I think what's happening between our two countries is very interesting, because we have this France-UK hub, which is great for international production coming from the US. We are on the same time zone. It's just a train away. We know each other very well. And we have example here of studios that have worked across. You have worked across with UK studio, on Damsel, for example, with a cross collaboration. So that, I think that's really precious also.
Yeah, and I think that, that burgeoning relationship, you know, now with our visual effects credit, you mentioned the IFTC. It seems to me that there's I'm crystal ball gazing here, but there seems to me to be a really fruitful opportunity for us to collaborate economically, creatively, even more, you know, over the next few years, because of what we've both put in place in terms of our infrastructure and the organic relationship between the companies and the talent. That is exactly what you were saying, Lawrence. And I want to come on to you and let's talk about, with some of the time we've got left, the specific example of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. I think we've got an image, actually, from work you've done, I think, which we can put up. Here we go. So you've done some fantastic work on this, which was shot in the UK, visual effects in France. Great, very, very great and big example of creative collaboration. So, Lawrence, talk to us about this.
Sure. The journey on Rings of Power started almost more than 3 years ago, close to 4 years ago. Anne Pozzoni, who was the VFX producer at that time, came to us and explained that the director, there were three different directors, and also the VFX supervisor, Jason Smith, were really keen to work with the yard, and they proposed us to work on the realm of the dwarfs, Khazad-dûm. And Khazad-dûm was done previously in the season 1 by Water Digital in New Zealand.
Yeah, makes sense.
And because they were pretty focused on blue guys in the forest, they were not able to continue their work on season 2. So they proposed us less than 100 shots on Khazad-dûm. It was close to 2 million, a bit less. Wow. And we started to work on this shot, and after a few months, because they were really pleased by our works, they propose us more shots and more shots and more shots, and then we end up with something like 6.5 million at the end of the day. The production took for us, I mean, the post-production more than 18 months,
wow,
and involved 30 or 40 artists during the shot, the post-production. It was really challenging because we had these references from Weta and season 1, so we had to mimic what they did and improve it. So it was really challenging for us. I mean, we are not Weta, definitely. Right. We are a bit tiny regarding this company. And yeah, it was really interesting because it was also a good way to improve the relation between Amazon, the yard, the VFX supervisor, and to build this relationship for the future.
And does that mean you talked about the millions of shots and the difference in size between yourselves and Weta, but was this in the end a kind of a good thing, because did it force you to build more capacity in the company to be able to deal with the volume of work?
The company grew up from 10 people to 100 people previously.
Right.
Because we were aware of, I mean, right after the COVID, we had this massive bubble of projects. And we've started with The Grey Man, then John Wick, and after that, Indiana Jones. And we were prepared to attract and to craft a lot of shots. The only thing is you need to have the first opportunity.
Yeah.
And thanks to the previous project we have done, I think that they were keen to increase the number of shots, and we have to prove alongside the post-production. I started, as I said, with less than 100 shots, and then grew up to, we ended up with 250 shots, something like that. And at the same time, we were on Halo Season 2 with the same amount of budget and with on something like 450 shots. So definitely it was the best opportunity to grow,
right.
But it was really challenging.
And presumably that wasn't, this wasn't just UK. The traffic in terms of was UK and France, but also presumably the triangle was the US. You were having to communicate with all three?
Everything was based in UK.
Right, it was.
Shot in Shepperton. Amazon was, I mean, the core team of Amazon on this project was in Shepperton too. And then, yeah, it was between UK and France.
Right, okay. No, I just
after that, there were a lot of companies in Montreal, in UK, in Sweden. But regarding us, it was been between UK and France.
Well, hopefully this is a collaboration that will continue, because we're hoping that the show's going to continue in the UK. So,
well, they're going to start a shooting in 1 month.
Yeah, I know.
For season 3.
So hopefully that is a creative collaboration that's long-term and ongoing, which I'm
fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So that's very exciting. I don't know whether there's any other examples of work that you've done between, the UK and France you want to mention in this context?
Yeah, we do a lot of work with Julian Murphy, Johnny Capps, and Howard Overman. They run Urban Myth Studios, and that's part owned by Canal Plus. So a lot of the shows we've worked on over the last few years, from War of the Worlds, had big French components to those projects. So part filmed in France, part filmed in London, part filmed in Newport, where they're based. Same for other projects as well that we've done. The Lazarus project, quite a few big scenes in Paris, and then more recently, Paris Has Fallen. One of the sequences that we did on Paris Has Fallen included one of the dignitaries from the French government who was being held to ransom. He sort of paid his ransom money, and rather than accept it, they decided to burn that money and then also burn him on top of them, but in front of the Eiffel Tower, which was quite an iconic shot. But again, that's the production spent quite a few months filming in Paris and around France, and that was a case of, obviously you can't do a stunt like that. It's very sensitive and it's very dangerous. So we got all of the plates filmed in Paris, and then we did an element shoot of The Guy on the Money as well, sort of back in the UK. So that was a shot that was sort of, you know, lots of component parts.
And just broadening, I'm going to open it up in a minute or two, actually, literally for the last sort of 10 minutes for questions from the audience. But before I do, I wanted to ask, it's a question to all of you, really. We've talked about location, obviously the UK and France, but also the geographical spread. You're based in Cambridge, you're talking about your offices in Montpellier and now the offices you've got in London. But I'm just wondering, I'm sure there's an economic reason for decentralising, but it's certainly something that's very important to the UK and the UK infrastructure. We're extremely committed at the British Film Commission to working with our national and regional partners to spread the love and the benefits of filming, and actually our nations and regional partners have done a brilliant job in terms of developing their own regional and national economies and infrastructure, and we're seeing production hubs all over the UK developing, and I think that's true of visual effects. And the visual effects, it's always been super saturated on London, but it's the fact that you're in Cambridge that's changing. And I just, as a comment, do you think that's going to further accelerate in the UK? And the same question to France as well.
I would really hope so. We've already got some established hubs in Bristol and Manchester. And also in Glasgow now. Glasgow's been through the wars a little bit with a few changes, but you know, we've seen Halon Entertainment come in there with quite a substantial investment, also supported by Scottish Enterprise. There will be a session tomorrow where we're talking in the UK pavilion.
Oh yes, good point.
And I don't want to steal Screen Scotland's
new announcement tomorrow.
Let's just trail it.
Yeah.
Just say that, you know, they're talking about a particular Scottish incentive for post and VFX.
Yeah.
So, you know, there will be I think more expansion in Scotland as a result. But I think there are some nascent regions, the northeast, for instance, where visual effects hardly features at all at the moment, but it is actually a very strong region for games development with places like Ubisoft there, and it also has a really strong university in Teesside and strong colleges teaching visual effects and animation skills. So I think actually that could be a very fertile ground, particularly given the investment that's gone into Crownworks in Sunderland, and you know, building up the filming.
Yeah, the new studios that are going to
So
be
I
built
think
there, yeah.
you know, that could be an interesting region for further expansion.
And in France, I mean, you mentioned actually before we came on stage, Lauren, about the connection with. You have a direct connection, and in fact, they're going to be housed in the same building in London with a particularly acclaimed school in terms of training. So was part of your motivation for being in Montpellier also for that educational alliance?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to the France 2030 program, we build a partnership with Artefx, which is one of the best VFX schools in the world. They are based in Montpellier and now also in Lille, in the north of France. So to be more attractive, going to the south of France was definitely a strategy, but going close to Artefx was part of the strategy.
Right.
Because we can work with them regarding the program. We can work with them to bring them HODs or senior artists to help them for the class. And also we have this close relationship for the new hires when the students are coming outside. So definitely it was a good option, and now they are coming to London, and we're going to continue this strategy in London.
It's very exciting. It's very exciting, and I think very encouraging to hear about that sort of diaspora, the sort of demographic move around the regions of France and the regions of the UK. I'm aware I'm being a very bad chair. We've got 8 minutes left and the clock is going to cut us out. So questions from the audience, please. Somebody's put their hand up right away and I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Does this work? Okay. I'd love to come back to Michael and to Laurent on two things: the time zone and the pipeline. I have a French servicing company that specializes in VFX. What I notice is that money comes in from the US. They've got money, and we've got the expertise either in the UK or in France. And I thought when Neil announced last year taking off the cap, I just thought, well, this is going to be really tough for France now. And as a servicing producer, what I found really interesting is that most of our companies can't handle the whole VFX job of a studio.
Hence the multiple vendors, yeah.
Hence the multiple vendors. And rather than go to Australia, which is a time zone nightmare, and even Canada that's got a 6-hour or 5-hour difference, I'm finding that France is getting quite a bit of spillover from the UK, and I'm interested in why and what the relationship between the two companies, between the two countries does to sort of enhance that, rather than going to Canada or to Australia.
I don't think I don't think we're consciously saying don't go to Canada or Australia, but we are saying come to France, come to the UK. But I don't know whether anybody wants to comment on that. Right?
I've worked with supervisors before who've been based in the UK, and I think that definitely is a factor. I know sort of supervisors where they do their UK feedback in the morning, and they'll do the Canadian feedback later in the afternoon, and they end up being very long days as well. So it must play a part, given that the fact there are so many really great studios in the UK that in order to make their lives easier and more compact, then to keep that work in the same time zone must be a factor. Yeah. I also, to come back to the smaller studios, when you're working on a TV show specifically, you have 8 episodes, so it's effectively like 8 feature films. So it does make sense to split that work up and share it across multiple vendors, because they kind of exist, you know, they're narratives that run through a TV show, but they're also individual elements that are easier to give to smaller companies.
Lauren?
Well, I would say being in the same time zone is definitely most effective, but I'm not sure this is the main point. And also, even if tax rebates makes vendors more attractive, I think VFX supervisors are keen to go to specific company for the quality of their work, for the relationship between the long relationship built between VFX supervisor, producer, and company, and tax incentives, time zone are just, from my point of view, bonus.
Was a question right at the front there? Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's any answer to this question, to be honest, but as probably most people heard, the main character of the United States cinematic universe has recently told the world that he's planning to impose a 100% tariff on foreign films, and it's even though it's still hard to understand what a foreign film would be considered today. If, let's say, it's imposed, do you have any plans on how to tackle that, and do you think that's going to hinder the work that you and Daphne is doing, respectively?
I should have said this at the beginning, because it was almost a tariff-free zone. Haven't quite, but all I can say is that I think that there's a lot of rumour, speculation. We're getting on with the work. I think we're getting on with the work. There aren't any tariffs imposed. France is very busy, UK is very busy. The tariffs aren't in place, and we know that, you know, our governments are extremely committed to our industries. We know that the US studios are very committed to working with us, and I think that anything else at the moment is just speculation. We can't control what we can't control, and we can't say things about things we don't know. I mean, and that's being really honest, is that it would be foolish of us to speculate. We are just getting on with this really fruitful creative and industrial collaboration, and will continue to do so, because you can see there's a kinship, there's a great working relationship, and we want that to be sustained, don't we? I think all of us. So, sorry, can't really say much more. We've got time for one last question. Gentlemen, I think it's coming that way.
It's the other elephant in the room, Brexit. You know, we once were one country, technically. Now, you know, half of you are one and the other half are not. So right now the regulations are pretty much still the same, but for instance the European Commission is looking at regulating AI, and would that mean, for instance, at some point half your companies have to work to a different set of regulations regarding AI tools as the other one? Are you looking forward to, are you monitoring anything at the moment? And also, yeah, you're not actually, especially when you're working with Ireland. Ireland is in the EU, and you're not. How do you cope with that?
I mean, I don't know that. I'd be interested if Michael Lawrence wanted to comment on that. I mean, the UK government is working on an AI policy and is actually trying. I think there's a lot of conversations going on about AI policy between the European Commission and the UK. To try and make sure, I think, that people are aligned rather than separated. I think there's a desire to have as much harmonisation as possible on these issues. So I don't think there's any kind of oppositional position, as far as I'm aware, between our respective governments, etc., on these these policies. Everyone's trying to work very hard to work out what's a very complicated landscape in terms of AI policy. In terms of the Brexitness of it, the very fact that we're having these conversations indicates that everybody's doing everything they can to work together, and they're doing it pretty successfully. And I know that our government is committed for the exchange of talent that Lawrence is talking about, for that to continue in terms of skilled talent being able to move between our borders and work harmoniously in those companies. And certainly the UK government, and I know the French government, doesn't want to do anything to put anything else in its way, as far as I'm concerned. In a way, I'm looking at Neil here, but.
Well, on a wider European point, we're talking about UK and France here, but in terms of the VFX community, it's much wider than that, because we've got German companies, we've got Rise Effects, we've got CineSite, who have got interests in Trickster in Munich. We've seen people like Important Looking Pirates, great name by the way, Important Looking Pirates. They're from Stockholm. They're also in Hamburg, but they're now in London. So, if anything, it's accelerated.
Yeah. So I'm not. I mean, and obviously our government is very much committed to now to trying to build new and more positive relationships. And the very fact we're sitting here, and the British Film Commission over the last year has signed a whole series of MOUs with our European partners, and we are, and Daphne and I talk all the time, we're all working together in terms of film commissions. So I think there's a much better relationship in the post-Brexit landscape, and has emerged over the last couple of years than there was at the beginning of it, and I think that's getting better. I think I've got to wrap because I've got 10 seconds. So I wanted to say thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to our brilliant panelists, and let's carry on working together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.